Hi, Stephen. So the one thing you mentioned that you would do is you'd volunteer. I've got to say I really agree with this suggestion. You've already watched my video and you've commented on it, so I think we both see where our desires here kind of overlap. From your response, you believe that I've taken your suggestion here of volunteering and maybe taken it a step further, kind of in my desire to do some acts of education, and by that I would mean ways of educating the public, maybe attending some conferences to better my knowledge, certainly maybe offering to speak at some conferences or to speak at some community meetings to inform the public of situations like this. I will say at this point that I had previously examined the possibility of going to law school, and this was a couple of years back. At least one university that I found here in Oklahoma for that had a requirement that during law school, students were not just expected, but required to volunteer a certain amount in work with the underprivileged. And I bring that up in relation to your point to volunteer to work with underprivileged, to do that sort of pro bono, if you will. And I ask myself, really, if it would be out of line for me to hope that maybe counseling might reach a junction like that one day or sometime here in the future. That the expectation is that we do work like that, and maybe that the requirement is that we do a little bit of work like that each year or within your own states for continuing licensure. You bring up the interpretation of the Golden Rule that you find in Matthew chapter 7 as your passage. Certainly, I find this one interesting, and I do think that it does agree with the idea of social justice found in Scripture. I think another popular passage to that is not too far away. I look at Matthew chapter 25, and really the context that surrounds verse 40. And there in the scene, it's the scene of the judgment day. Christ draws everybody to the judgment seat. There are some on the right and some on the left, and we know he goes down the list of the disadvantaged. And then he tells those on his right, well done, as it's been done to the least of these. In verse 40, he's talking to those on the left. Those on the left have asked, when did we see you in such dire straits, Lord? And he says, as you've done it to the least of these, so you've done it to me. And certainly I think that the whole passage there and the whole scene kind of agrees with this idea of social justice. As you've done it to the least of these. We talk about social justice when we talk about minorities and their access to things like counseling, or maybe realizing that one way to help these minorities is that there are social constructs or situations that must be resolved to best assist them. We can certainly take a look at that, but I think the idea that Christ is getting at is you've done to the least of these people, you've done to me, certainly speaks volumes about the idea of social justice found in Scripture.